All right, let's just jump right in. What if you could actually prove manifestation with science? I mean, really prove it. Well, today we're going to break down something called the Solar-Biofield Framework. It's this pretty wild research proposal that's trying to build a solid scientific bridge to one of the most out there ideas you can imagine. It's a question that I think we've all kicked around at some point, right? Can our thoughts, our intentions, actually shape the physical world? And I don't mean in a philosophical way, I mean in a measurable, scientific way. This framework basically says, yeah, maybe they can, and we should absolutely be putting that idea under the microscope. And that's exactly where this whole framework comes into play. Now, it's super important to get this straight from the get-go. This is not a belief system. It's not about faith. It's a carefully planned out scientific proposal, a roadmap, really, designed to put these very ideas to the test. So let's dig in and see how they plan on doing that. Okay, so the goal here is, well, it's nothing short of audacious. Seriously, we're not talking about small, incremental questions. The ambition here is to lay the groundwork for a whole new physics of consciousness, a kind of unified theory that finally connects the world inside our heads with the world out there. And this quote from the proposal itself just says it all, doesn't it? The key phrase that just jumps out at me is empirically supported. That's the whole ballgame right there. The goal is to take these big, visionary concepts and drag them into the lab for some rigorous, repeatable, scientific testing. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. Before we can even touch the really mind-bending hypotheses, we gotta understand the foundation it's all built on. And this is solid, established science. We're not talking about speculative stuff yet. These are fundamental concepts from biology and physics that we already know are true. First up, bioelectricity. And yeah, it totally sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it is a fundamental fact of your existence. You are electric. I'm not just talking about your brain and your nerves. Literally, almost every single cell in your body is using tiny electrical signals to communicate and organize itself. It's like the living software running on our biological hardware. Okay, next up, and this one is just cool, biophotons. And yes, you heard that right. Your cells, they literally emit light. It's a super, super faint glow, but we can measure it. Now, for a while, we thought it was just a byproduct of metabolism, just waste light. But the really exciting hypothesis is that this light isn't random at all. It might actually be a coherent, lightning-fast communication network for your entire body. So think about it. If our cells are electric and they're emitting light, it just makes sense that they're generating fields, right? And that's all the biofield is. It's the scientific term for the sum total of all these measurable electromagnetic fields our body creates. When you get an EEG to measure your brain waves or an ECG for your heart's electrical field, you are literally measuring the biofield. And finally, the last building block, psychoneuroimmunology. It's a mouthful, I know, so let's just call it PNI. This is a totally mainstream, buttoned-down, established field of science. And what it's proven, beyond any doubt, is that our minds directly affect our bodies. How you think, how you feel, your stress, your joy, all of that creates real, tangible, measurable changes in your nervous system, your hormones, and your immune system. The mind-body connection? That's settled science. Full stop. So there you have it. Bioelectricity, biophotons, the biofield, and PNI. Those are the pieces of the puzzle we already have on the table. The crucial question this framework is asking is, what if we can connect them in a whole new way? And this is the pivot point, you guys. This is where we shift from what science already knows to what this proposal wants to find out. And it does this with three big ideas, three core hypotheses. You can think of them like three logical bridges they want to build and then test. First, there's a link between the sun and our cells' energy. Second, they propose a whole new job for our biofield. And third, they're suggesting a much more direct circuit between our consciousness and our biology. Okay, so hypothesis number one. This one suggests a direct link between sunlight and our cellular power plants, the mitochondria. And this isn't totally out of left field. It builds on a known science called photobiomodulation, which is just the idea that light affects our cells. The proposal here is that sunlight could literally supercharge our cellular batteries, flooding us with energy at the most fundamental level. Now, hypothesis number two. This is where things start to get really wild. It proposes that our biofield isn't just some passive byproducts like exhaust fumes from an engine. Instead, get this, it might be a dynamic, programmable field, almost like a biological hard drive that can actually store and transmit the information of our intentions, and in turn, influence ourselves. And that brings us to the third hypothesis, and I think this comparison here is really key. Look, the standard scientific view based on PNI is that thoughts influence our health through known pathways, like pumping out stress hormones. We know that. But what this framework proposes is a much more direct circuit. The idea is that focused conscious intention could actually steer those same pathways to directly influence our genetic expression. It's a subtle shift in thinking, but the implications are absolutely massive. Okay, so this all sounds incredibly fascinating, right? But it brings up a huge practical question. How on earth do you actually test manifestation in a laboratory? You can't just have a manifestationometer. To make this scientific, you have to take these really abstract ideas and turn them into cold, hard, measurable data. And the framework tackles this problem head-on. What they do is create what scientists call an operational definition. They're defining manifestation capacity not as some vague wish or a fuzzy feeling, but as something concrete, the measurable ability of a person to achieve a predefined goal. And once you can measure that, you can start to see if it lines up with other hard data, like changes in their biofield. And this table just lays it all out so perfectly. It shows exactly how they plan to turn these abstract ideas into stuff you can actually put on a spreadsheet. So for manifestation capacity, you see they're not just looking at did they achieve the goal. They're also looking at things like influencing random number generators, which is a classic consciousness experiment, while tracking concrete stuff like their cortisol and heart rate variability. And for this specific meditative state they're calling sefirot flow, look at that list. They want to track brain scans, gene expression, and even those tiny biophoton light emissions. It's incredibly thorough. So the big question is, how do they actually plan to do all of this? I mean, a proposal this ambitious can't just be a good idea. It needs a clear, rigorous, step-by-step plan that builds the evidence from the ground up, from the petri dish all the way up to human beings. And they've got one. The whole plan is laid out in 3 phases over about 4 years. Phase 1 starts small, right in the lab, just testing that basic connection between light and cells in a dish. Then Phase 2 moves up to pilot clinical trials with actual people to see if these intentional practices create real, measurable changes in their bodies. And finally, Phase 3 is the big one, using things like fMRIs and gene testing to actually map the specific brain activity and genetic changes that happen during these states. You can see how it's this really logical, careful, step-by-step process of building a case. And that really brings us to the final and I think most provocative thought. Look, this framework is a long way from being proven, but what it represents is a serious, structured, scientific attempt to ask one of the biggest questions we can possibly imagine. What if our consciousness isn't just a passenger along for the ride in our bodies, but it's actually the pilot with its hands on the controls, capable of shaping our biology and maybe even our reality? What would it truly mean for us if a physics of consciousness was actually possible? That's the question this research so bravely sets out to answer.